Mercenary captains died in different ways. We will name a few now. Most fell in battle, betrayal, disease, or political cleanup. First, John Hawkwood. John Hawkwood was a 14th century English mercenary captain who turned war into a business. In Italy, he led the White Company, a hired force of several hundred mounted and foot soldiers. He made his name in the wars between Florence, Milan, and the Papal States, where city after city paid him to fight, then paid again to keep him away. That was the mercenary code of the time. Men followed him for loot, steady pay, and his skill in fast raids and sudden retreats. By the late 1380s, he had become one of the most feared soldiers in Tuscany. Then age caught up with him. He died in 1394 at Florence, but the cause is not settled. Some sources say he fell ill after years of campaigning. Others later claimed he was poisoned or quietly removed because he knew too much. What is clear is that Florence honored him, even after hiring him to survive its own wars. His body was later buried with honors in the cathedral, a rare end for a man who had spent his life selling violence to the highest bidder. In the end, Hawkwood proved that even a great captain could be beaten by time, and time never has to pay. A little earlier, in the late 13th century, Roger of Flor rose in a very different kind of mercenary world. He was a former Templar-linked adventurer who built the Catalan Company, a hard private army made up of rough veterans from Aragon and beyond. He first won fame at sea and then on land, serving the Byzantine Empire after Emperor Andronikos II hired him to smash Turkish forces in Anatolia. He did the job. His men beat back enemy raids, burned camps, and pushed deep into the frontier, but his success made him dangerous. In 1305, while he was at Adrianople, near the Byzantine-Bulgarian border, he was invited to a banquet by Michael IX's circle. There, according to the main sources, Allen guards and other men attacked him and cut him down. Some accounts say his followers were also trapped and killed. Other versions shift the blame and add rumor, because the Catalan chronicler Ramon Muntana saw the event as treachery, while Byzantine writers tried to soften it. However it happened, the result was the same. Roger died not in open battle, but in a planned murder after he had become too powerful to keep. His death shattered trust, and the Catalan Company answered with years of revenge. That is the oldest mercenary lesson of all. When a ruler hires a killer, the bill can come due in blood. In late medieval Italy, the condottieri were not born as simple soldiers. Most started as knights, local nobles, or young men with armor, horses, and no steady income. They sold skill first, then loyalty. One year they rode for a city like Florence. The next, they wore the colors of Milan, the Pope, or Naples. In the city-state wars, a captain could switch sides in a single season if the pay was better or the treaty was safer. That was the system. War was a contract, and honor often followed the money. Micheletto Attendolo was one of those men. He rose from a fighting family and built a name through raids, escorts, and fast horse work. Like many condottieri, he lived by timing, not by faith. He fought for different masters, then shifted again when the balance changed. His career shows the pattern clearly. A captain could be brave in battle and still be a political gambler every day off the field. In Italy, that kind of man was useful, feared, and never fully trusted. The most famous of them all was John Hawkwood, known in Italy as Giovanni Acuto. He began as an English man-at-arms, then became a hired leader in the wars between Florence, Pisa, and Milan. He moved through the peninsula with disciplined cavalry and a cold eye for profit. He was not a reckless killer. He was careful. He preferred pressure, raids, and position over waste. That is why he survived so long. Hawkwood died in 1,394 inches Florence, not on a battlefield, but after a long illness. The city gave him honors, then buried him in the cathedral as if a hired sword could be turned into a civic symbol. Even then his end was plain. The man who lived by campaigns was finally stopped by his own body. Others were not so lucky. Alberico de Barbiano helped shape the Italian style of war and trained a generation of captains, but many of his kind ended in bed, not in glory. Some were taken captive after a failed move, some came down with fever after a siege, some died from wounds that looked small at first, then turned raw and infected in the heat and filth of camp life. A lance cut in a river fight could become a death sentence a week later. A fall from a horse could crack ribs, burst a lung, and leave a man gasping on the march. In a world without real surgery or clean water, the battlefield kept killing long after the fighting ended. And that is the strange truth of the condottieri. They were experts at war, but war did not always choose the grandest end for them. Many died from infection, exhaustion, captivity, or old age after a last contract was signed. The best soldiers in Italy often did not fall under banners and trumpets. They slipped away in tents, in sick rooms, or in a city bed after the fighting was already over. In the end, the mercenary captain was ruled by the same thing he sold to others. Survival was never guaranteed. If you want the next name, keep going. By the Renaissance, the old mercenary captain was still a big name, but the world around him was changing fast. Gunpowder made walls crack, cannon made castles shake. Kings began building standing armies, and that meant a captain who once rented out his sword could turn into a problem the moment he stopped being useful. In the old days, fame could feed a man. Now it could also get him hunted. Take Giovanni dalle Bande Nere, the famous Italian captain of the 1520s. He had a hard war record and rode like a man who expected to win by speed and fear. In 1526, near Governolo in northern Italy, a cannon shot hit his leg during a fight against the Landsknechts. The wound looked small at first. Then the bone broke down. The doctors tried to cut the leg, but the damage had already spread. Within days, fever took him. He died at 28, young, famous, and useless to the men who had praised him only when he was charging forward. Firearms had not just killed him, they had made his old style of war look fragile. A few decades later, the French captain Blaise de Montluc showed the same shift in a different way. He survived battle after battle, but his world was now ruled by court favor, not just battlefield skill. During the French wars of religion, men like him could become dangerous just by being too famous, too loyal to a faction, or too hard to control. Many captains were not killed by enemy steel at all. They were trapped by politics, dragged into prison, and sent to the block once their patrons lost power. The state had learned a new trick. It no longer needed every hard man. It only needed the ones it could command. That is why Francesco Maria della Rovere and other Italian war leaders kept finding themselves on the edge of ruin. A captain could win a siege, save a border, or smash a cavalry line, and still end up hated by the same rulers who hired him. Once armies became more regular, the old freelance commander looked less like a hero and more like a man with his own private army. That was not a badge anymore, it was a threat. Franz von Sickingen, one of the great German knight captains, learned that lesson in blood in 1523. He fought the wrong mix of princes, cities, and bishops, then got trapped at Nanstein Castle after the walls were smashed by heavy guns. He was badly wounded in the siege. By the time the defenders got in, he was finished. He died from those wounds the next day. The man who had lived by pressure and raid was brought down by artillery, the new weapon of organized power. His castle fell with him. And then there was Marco Antonio Bragadin. He was not a mercenary captain in the purest sense, but he lived in the same brutal world of hired war and shifting loyalties. After the long siege of Famagusta in 1571, he was taken by the Ottomans, flayed alive, and killed after the city had already fallen. That death said everything about the age. The captain who once stood at the center of war could now end as a warning sign. By the 17th century, the pattern was even clearer. The battlefield still made men famous. The state now decided whether they lived. If a mercenary captain could not fit inside a king's army, a king's law, or a king's court, then his name became a liability. In the new order, the sword did not stop being dangerous. It just stopped protecting the man who carried it. That old rule did not end with kings. In the late 20th century, it just moved into airports, jungles, and news feeds. Bob Denard, the French mercenary boss who spent decades in the Comoros and across Africa, built a life around coups, guard jobs, and dirty deals. In 2007, after years of arrests and exile, he died at 78 inches France with Alzheimer's disease. No gunfight, no last stand, just a body that finally quit after a long political fall. The irony was plain. He had survived wars, but not time. His death closed a chapter, yet his name kept coming back in court files and old reports, where every operation looked smaller and darker than the legend. Then came men like Executive Outcomes founder Eben Barlow's world of private war, where the line between soldier, contractor, and fixer got thin. And then there was Simon Mann, the ex-British officer linked to the 2004 coup plot in Equatorial Guinea. He was caught in Zimbabwe, flown to prison, and later released after years behind bars. He did not die in battle. He lived long enough to become a symbol of post-Cold War grey warfare, the kind that runs on cash, papers, and quiet deals. Around him, the story kept changing. Official records talked about an aborted coup. Critics talked about foreign backing and oil politics. The media turned the whole case into a package of mugshots, prison shots, and leaked details, because modern mercenary life is not just fought in the field, it is also judged in public. The same pattern hit Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner chief tied to wars in Syria, Libya, and Ukraine. He rose fast. He sold food contracts, built a force, and turned battlefield chaos into power. Then on the 23rd of August 2023, his private jet went down near Kuzenkino in Russia's Tver region. Everyone on board died. Russia said little at first. Some reports pointed to a blast. Others kept talking about sabotage, revenge, or a warning from the top. The facts were simple. A plane fell. Bodies were recovered. The meaning was not simple at all. His death showed how fast a warlord can go from asset to threat, and from threat to debris. In the age of cameras and drones, even a mercenary's end gets framed like a state message. The legend lives on, but the bill always comes due. Tap the next video. Across all these cases, one thing stands out. Most mercenary captains did not fall to the enemy they feared most. They fell to the weak points around them. Loyalty broke. Wounds got dirty. Food ran low. Horses collapsed. A deal turned sour. That is the real pattern. Their lives were built on speed, skill, and trust, but trust was the first thing to fail. In the field, one bad night, one bad bargain, or one bad fever could end a man who had survived years of battle. The common deaths are easy to name. Some were killed in combat. Some died of infection after a cut that never closed right. Some were put to death after politics changed. Some were hunted down in an ambush. Some were lost in accidents on roads, rivers, or ships. A few lived long enough to die old, which is rare, but it also tells the same story. The longer a captain stayed alive, the more he had to trade violence for caution, and many of them never made that switch in time. That shift is bigger than any one man. In the medieval world, a captain could still survive on personal force, close-range command, and local loyalty. In later centuries, war became larger, cleaner, and colder. Armies grew into systems, states kept records, officers were watched. Payroll, passports, and patronage mattered as much as a sword arm. Once that happened, a mercenary leader was no longer just a fighter, he became a risk. And when a state decided he was too useful, too expensive, or too dangerous, it could end him fast. That is why betrayal shows up so often. A captain could beat a rival on the road and still die from a knife in his own camp. That is why illness matters too. Before modern medicine, a simple wound could turn into fever, swelling, and blood poisoning within days. Men kept riding, kept marching, kept bleeding until their bodies gave out. Their enemies did not have to be the strongest. They only had to wait. In the end, the mercenary captain sits right on the edge of two worlds. He belongs to personal war, but he is destroyed by organized war. He makes his name through force, then loses it to bureaucracy, disease, or a cleaner kind of killing. That is the hard lesson here. The sword can build a career, but it cannot protect a man from the system that grows around it. They all ended the same way, beaten by war, betrayed by power, or cut down by chance. Comment with the death that surprised you most.